Welcome back, everyone. After a long break, we are starting a kind of season two today, and we will talk mostly about three topics. First, the wealth distribution problem. We introduced it when we were talking about paradigm shifts, and it was one of the three core problems today. And second, how the AI economy can unfold in the coming years and what impacts it might have on wealth distribution. And third, of course, we will continue to learn and practice system thinking throughout our journey. But for today, we're going to time travel to the 18th and 19th century UK and walk through some small but key moments that shaped our world. That those moments are cornerstones of our transition from mercantile to industrial economy. And we will try to sketch a pattern of transition to read our current transformation to AI economy. And the aim of this series is to extract a clear map about how changes we should expect to see and what to watch for in the coming years. As always, no fluff, no doom talk, practical historical approach with systems thinking perspective. All right, let's start. From systems thinking perspective, there are six essential systems that every economic transition has to transform while it is establishing. I call them the transition step. First, a new, reliable enough solution rewrites cost curves. Then, a few rules and institutions click into place, and firms and finance starts to reorganize around them. And this changes the game of scaling and the design of supply chains, and also the skills required to operate this new economy, along with new status symbols. And all these transformations, bit by bit, change our daily behaviors and culture, first at the edges and then all at once. These six subsystems, or maybe we can call them economic system stocks, transfer together and interact with each other, but they move at different paces, and every cultural transformation leads to another breakthrough in the first system of reliability and cost curves, and everything starts shifting again. If you can read this stack for prior shifts, you can forecast the next by knowing where to look and what to watch for. But there is one more force that stands apart from these six. It is not a system, but a feedback loop that triggers when the previous six have succeeded too well, too fast, and too unevenly. I call it the winner's curse. It emerges when growth slows but pride grows, when winners hoard gains while others are left behind, when confidence turns to arrogance and competition turns to conflict. When all these circumstances come together, they may lead to conflicts like the First and Second World War if they were not managed wisely, and it was not managed wisely back that time. And this is not a stage of progress, it is the collapse risk built into every great transformation, obviously. But more or less, this is how transitions happen or happened in the past. Before understanding how transformation to AI economy may unfold before our eyes, today I'll focus only on how this stacked work in transformation to industrial economy. We are going back to 18th century UK to understand the very dynamics that paved the road for the age of oil and steel. And one of the most used resources back at that time was coal and tin. After great deforestation due to shipmaking and meeting the demand of growing population, coal took a central role in the UK's mercantile economy. And also tin was used to weld, make alloys, and rust-proof everything made out of iron, from sewage pipes to cutlery and pottery. Think of coal and tin like today's oil and steel back at that time. However, the deeper the miners dug to extract tin or coal, the more they encounter a persistent and dangerous problem of flooding. Manual pumps of that era were inadequate for clearing the water from these deeper mines, which led to coal extraction to a full stop in many areas. And this created a critical bottleneck for the primary energy source of that time. In 1712, an ironmonger, Thomas Newcomen, invented an atmospheric engine to pump the water out of the tin mines. And this was the first time in our history that we reliably turned heat into mechanical work, and it started in one very specific bottleneck, the flooded mines, and this created a chain of innovations. First, Newcomen's atmospheric pump engine solved the mine flooding problem, but it burned a ton of coal and it was not efficient enough to lever the economy. And then James Watt's additions of separate condenser in 1765 and parallel motion in 1784 cut the operating costs of steam engines dramatically. And with commercial push, steam power turned from a niche fixed into a general power source. And then we invented internal combustion engines. Costs fell, reliability rose. Steam power was no longer powering the mines, but factories of all kinds were popping across the UK. And in a decade, we saw the rise of steam powered railway transportation, changing how the land connected. And this one little invention to solve mine flooding was shaping the entire economy, increasing mobility of goods and growing the economy in an unprecedented ways. And yet, this quantum jump would not be possible if James Watt did not iterate the design and make it cost effective enough to be scaled. And this is our first system stock, reliability and cost curves of the solution. Until it reaches a certain threshold, transformation does not start to disrupt the current model for a broader transformation. What do I mean by reliability and cost curves of the solution? Short answer, reliability asks, does it work every time? And cost curves ask, does unit cost get cheaper or does quality get much better at the current cost level as we improve and scale? Think of this system stock like a bathtub that is filled with engineering fix, field learning, and R&D investment. And when it crosses a threshold, people stop experimenting and start reorganizing around that new technology. While this reliability and cost curve stock is filled with fixes, learning, and R&D investments and gets closer to the threshold, we start to suffer from the next bottleneck because the emergent solution faces the establishment. Now, the problem is who owns what and who gets to compete and who allows to do what and who is responsible when it gets wrong. That whole bundle is the rules and rights stock. Let's stay in Britain for a couple of minutes and watch how everything click into place. First, patents set the innovation tempo, and James Watt patented the separate condenser in 1769. Then, crucially, Parliament extended his protection in 1775 to last until 1800, and Watt licensed engines and charged royalties as a share of coal saved compared to Newcomen's original engine. That clarity made Watts and Bolton's business investable because you knew what you could build and on what terms. But it also meant the fusion of this innovation moved at the speed of that legal clock. The day Watt's monopoly window shut in 1800, high pressure designs bloomed, and so the rules were setting the pace of this new development. Then followed the Land and Labor Reorganization in 1805 and 1845. Land reform actually started in 1759, the Private Enclosure Acts, but it followed by 1801 and 1845 UK Enclosure Acts, which took one giant shared village field and fenced it into private plots. And most of the medieval common land of England was lost due to this enclosure acts. And this created a wealth gap between big landowners and small landowners. Thus, many small land-owning farmers and laborers left their towns and they headed to the new industrial towns where mills were hiring, basically. And that's the push pull in plain words. Push because fewer rural jobs after enclosure, and pull because factor wages in growing towns. The laws changed who owned what by pushing people out of villages, which made a mobile wage workforce possible and gave towns the legal clarity to build mills and housing. In systems terms, this is the rules and rights stock filling up. Property rules and movement rights shifted, and that legal shift unlocked the labor supply the new industrial machines were waiting for, basically. And as towns flooded with people and factories opened everywhere, this time safety and legitimacy were inevitably drawn into law. While new engine and boiler designs were coming to the market, a series of boiler explosions happened at that time. And also, children were working 14 hours a day and suffering from deadly accidents. And these sort of events led to public anger and eventually turned into laws and legislations. First, the Factory Act in 1833 created inspectors and put limits on child labor. Then, the Mines Act in 1842 cancelled women and children under 10 from underground work. Then, the 10 Hours Act in 1847 kept the working day for women and youngsters in textiles. Did these rules slow down the industry? Maybe at the margin, but more importantly, they stabilized the newly developing industrial economy and kept the public willing to operate while cutting catastrophic failures. And along with safety issues, another friction was actually standards. The Railway Clearinghouse in 1842 standardized the paperwork so freight can move across companies. The Gauge Act in 1846 pushed toward a common track gauge, and railway time helped synchronize schedules. And yeah, I know standards sounds boring always, but they are the lubricants of a well-working system by lowering the transaction costs so that networks can actually work. And all these events and many other legislations together filled the rules and rights stock. Notice the sequence with our system sense here. Reliability and cost flipped first because engines got cheaper and good enough, and immediately the system ran into can we do that and on what terms we can do that. Rules and rights is that second stock. It fills via the flows of legislation, court decisions, charters, insurance practices, and technical standards. And everything clicks into place to become the new establishment basically. When it crosses a threshold, entrepreneurs finally know the game they are playing. Investors can price the risks, and the next stock starts transforming the firm and finance architecture. That's where we are heading next. Cottages and guilds give way to factories and joint stock railways, and balance sheets pivot from land and muscle to machines, fuel, and scale. Let's watch how organization and money were rewired to fit. Think of this as the moment when people stop treating STEAM like a gadget and start rebuilding the workplace around it and the balance sheet around it. First, we are going to Derbyshire around the same time period when steam engines were becoming optimized. Another new idea was cooking there. The idea of modern factory layout based on machines, not workers. In 1771, inventor Richard Arkwright opened the Crawford Mill to run his new water frame. The machine was big, fast, and needed steady power and steady hands side by side, and work moved to the machine basically under one big roof with shift schedules, supervisors, and maintenance logs. This is the birth of modern factory layout, not just a building, but a system. Breaking work into steps, assigning each step to a person, measuring output, paying by piece or time. But this water frame based production had to be beside a water to run because it was water powered, as the name suggests. Now, add steam power to this new idea of factory and watch the location freedom appeared in the UK. In the 1780s and 90s, as Boulton and Watt leased their engines, mills no longer had to sit on water walls basically. Owners picked sites near coal workers and ports, so steam power changed the trade network and the demographics as well. But big machines mean big upfront costs. So the financing model has to grow up. Early on, owners formed partnerships and local share clubs, but the canal builders showed another path. They pooled capital from many investors to fund big, lumpy projects like the Bridgewater Canal, which was made possible by the same name Bridgewater Canal Act in 1760. The legal upgrades of the mid 18th century make this normal. The Joint Stock Companies Act in 1844 made forming a company easier. The Limited Liability Act in 1855 said if the company fails, you lose only what you put in, not your house. That one change turned thousands of rich people into would be investors, and more investors, more mills, more mines, and more rails. That's when railways and heavy industry gained their natural financing vehicle, actually. And another financial rewiring was the management of cash, basically, because day-to-day money needs to be get smoother. Imagine you are a spinner who needs cash now for cotton but won't be paid by the weaver for weeks. Solution: the bill of exchange. You hand a promise to pay to your bank, and the bank gives you most of the money today and collects later. This is called the discounting of the bill. Now, with these bills of exchange, cash can flow even while cloth is still on the loom. And finance isn't just more money, it is faster and safer plumbing of the money. So the industrial machine can run every day without seizing up. And if you step back with our systems length again, you can see the firm and finance architecture stock filling up like a bathtub. On the firm side, the flows are entrepreneurship, production matters like timekeeping, piece rates, maintenance logs, and location changes like near to coal and labor or ports depending on industry. And on the finance side, the flows are legal forms like joint stock, limited liability, and instruments like bills of exchange and insurance, and financial standards like audits and cost accounting. And you can see why this stock sits after rules and rights. Investors won't fund giant boilers without clear patents and liability. Towns cannot host mills without property rules and safety law. And business owners cannot measure costs until standards and contracts exist. Reliability and cost curves flipped the can we. The rules and rights flipped the shall we. And firm and finance now flips the how we by clearing how to organize and pay for it at scale. As firm and finance stock fills, a new bottleneck emerges: the supply chain and scale. Factories and railways drink coal, iron, steel, cotton like water, and they need the world to move on time. Canals dug, rails laid, gauges agreed, ports expanded, and telegraphs strung, warehouses built. In other words, once firms and finance are ready, the economy demands plumbing. And this is a story of how 19th century Britain and then whole world built the economy's blood veins: canals, rails, telegraph, and ports that turned a cluster of machine mills into a fully industrial system. And it began with water. We are going back again to Bridgewater Canal, started hauling coal into Manchester, and it allowed Manchester to have cheaper coal. Over the 1760s to 19s, canals laced the Midlands, creating a supply network, and cheaper, predictable coal kept streaming running day after day. However, deliveries were depending on perfect weather. So we need something else. Enter the iron rails beating the canals and rivers. The Stockton Darlington line opened in 1825 to move coal, and the Liverpool Manchester line followed in 1830, proving passengers and freight can run on a schedule. Parliament approved line after line in 1840s. And information also learned to travel just as fast. The telegraph appeared in 1837 along the railways. This was another important step towards the future because it will pave the road for a knowledge economy. But during the 19th century, it meant that prices, orders, delays, what used to be rumor riding a horse can finally become same day facts. And by 1866, a durable transatlantic cable lets London talk to New York. This eventually shrink the map. Steamships and the Suez Canal in 1869 shortened the routes. Mills scrambled to source from Egypt and India. Merchants invented new forms of contracts to hedge prices, and everyone learned that a world spanning supply chain is powerful but fragile. However, we didn't stop there and poured materials to widen the pipes. That took iron from quartz puddling and rolling, and then cheap Bessemer steel meant longer rails, stronger bridges, bigger ships. Each metallurgical step is another size up in the economy's arteries. More volume, fewer breakdowns. If we step back with the systems lens again, you can see the supply chain and scale stock filled day by day, miles of canal and rail, wire strength for telegraphs. Standards agreed, technology improved. As supply chain and scale fill, delivery times shrink and stabilize. Transportation cost fell, information latency dropped, and different firms could plug into each other without renegotiating the universe every Tuesday. That relief in everyday uncertainty is what let firms plan bigger, investors fund longer, and the whole system accelerate without shaking itself apart. And the moment you speed up the pipes, the work changes. Rail timetables need clerks and telegraphers, and warehouses need accountants and inspectors. Factories running schedules need engineers, foremen, and repair crews. In other words, the next bottleneck is people. The question is who could run all this? The industrial system had demanded a new kind of worker, literate, numerate, punctual, and safe around powerful machines. So the 19th century had started to build that human operating system. It had begun informally on the shop floor, obviously. Masters had taught boys, foremen had taught rules of thumb, and older hands had shown newcomers how to oil a bearing without losing a finger. As machines had multiplied and schedules had tightened, ad hoc teaching had not kept up. So towns had created mechanics institutes, a sort of evening school where artisans had learned arithmetic, technical drawing, mechanics, and chemistry. By the 1820s and 30s, there had been dozens across Britain. And as technology improved, technical credentials had thickened the ladder. The Institution of Civil Engineers and the Institution of Mechanical Engineers had formalized their professions where experience plus examination led to membership and status. Later, city and guilds founded and standardized technical exams in everything from metalwork to electrical practice. Shop floor know how did not disappear, but papers, certificates, tickets, and memberships had begun to travel with the worker, making skills visible to distant employers. And companies also developed rule books, exams, and in house classes. The more the network had synchronized, the more a small mistake had caused big troubles. So, standard procedures had crept into everyday work and then state followed. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 had set up local schools, and the Education Act of 1880 had made attendance compulsory for young children. And in 1891, elementary schooling had become free. Within a generation, a child in an industrial town had been far more likely to read a timetable, fill a ledger, and follow safety notice than his grandfather had been. And employers had started to assume basic literacy and numeracy, which had changed the kind of jobs they had designed. Elementary schools, evening classes, factory schools, and railway training had filled gaps. Drawing schools had helped weavers. Commercial colleges had trained clerks for the ocean of paperwork. Step by step, the workforce had shifted. And as this stock filled, everyday life had tilted with it. Households had set clocks to railway time. Mornings started with whistle. Newspapers and ledgers had become common. Engineer, clerk, and foreman had become identities you could earn actually. And that brings us to the last step in this stack, the one that always moved slowest and stuck deepest, the culture and daily behavior stock. As industries grew, steels became crowded. First gaslight and then electric lighting had stretched the day and working time. Tram lines had pushed neighborhoods out. Families had reorganized around shifts and school bells. Believe it or not, leisure had taken on timetables too. The Saturday half holiday had spread by the late 19th century and created reliable days off. Cheap rail tickets had carried people to seaside towns at weekends. Football clubs and music halls had filled with people. When people knew exactly when they would rest, they had begun to plan pleasure, changing the culture and the way we live. Shopping had turned into brands and aisles. The department stores started to pop up everywhere. Mail ordering had reached to farmhouses. Posters had painted walls with soap and chocolate. A literate public can read ads, timetables, novels, and instruction sheets. The home was filled with industrial goods like sewing machines, animal wear, canned food, bicycles. A new idea of modern had taken root in the pantry and the wardrobe. And politics learned to run on timetables too. As cities filled with people and literacy rose, people met in chapels, pubs, and union rooms. Cheap papers carried arguments from Millgate to kitchen table. And in Britain, Chartists pressed in the 1830s and 40s for working rights, enabling to Reform Acts become possible in 1832 and then 1867 and then 1884, widened the male voting. The Trade Union Act in 1871 and Secret Ballot Act made all these reforms safer. Then obviously women pushed in parallel, and first in 1980 and then 1928 got voting rights in Britain. Employers and states learned that dependable workers also wanted dependable rights, so early welfare laws are right. This time Bismarck's Germany led the cause for accident insurance and pensions in the 1880s and later copied to the UK and elsewhere. The same networks that moved coal and cloth now moved votes, dues, and petitions. The city and state itself become a machine for voice. From the system's lens, this was the culture and daily behavior stock filling. Schools, wages, newspapers, club, and weekend clocks created shared routines, but these flows spilled back into rules and right. The franchise widened, ballots turned secret, unions gained standing, and basic social insurance took root. That feedback loop stabilized a high speed industrial economy and gave governments the legitimacy and tax base to build new pipes, schools, and standards, and prime the system for the next flip because cultural transformation always sets the condition for the next big transformation. So we are coming to the early 20th century where daily life already ran on grids and wires. The industrial world had become electrified, cooled, and connected, but there was a fear of slow growth buried under the national pride, which was infusing into the race for steel and oil. Great powers started an arms race. Leaders of all kinds promised quick victories and tied their future to secret plans, and the First World War started in 1940. It taught states to plan at nation scale and to count everything. Ministries tracked grain, shells, and men. Recordings moved from dusty ledgers into command rooms and became statistics. In the interwar years, broadcasting deepened, electrical grids spread, and the telephone network thickened. The Second World War pushed the system further. Governments, industries, and university labs worked as a machine. Radar, skewed radio, code breaking, operations research, and the first electronic computers moved from experiments into working systems. Here is where I had a feedback loop to our stack. Winner's curse. It became inevitable when prestige meets arms races, propaganda, and brittle trade with a slow growing economy made leaders believe force would pay better than compromise. This is when mobilization outran diplomacy and led to two world wars with great damage to civilization. Yet, the spillover also reset the board. Seen through our stack, six systems had set the baseline, and the winner's curse then forced the system to industrialize information itself. The wars drove the reliability and cost curves for electronics and communication and proved they could run at immense scale, and that wrote the new rules for global coordination. By the late 1940s, the pieces were in place for the next flip. Economies will now get ready to reorganize around knowledge, data, and coordination. This is where we will pick up in the next episode. We will walk through post war labs and universities, semiconductors and networks, legal changes that unlocked innovation, mass higher education, and how those six stocks clicked again to build the knowledge economy and brought us to the verge of yet another potential world war and a new form of economy. Then, in the third part, we will bring it to home, to today, to today's AI economy, so you can see which stocks are filling now and where the next bottlenecks may surface. If this helps you see the pattern behind big shifts. Subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And if you learn something, share this with one friend who loves history, economics, or tech. And tell me in the comments which stocks now feel most likely to pass the threshold. All right, that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay curious and take care.